Hello and welcome to another episode of Page Burners, where nobody except Carl will be setting any fires and all of us will be reading pages from the Malazan Book. We are currently working our way through Gardens of the Moon. We are pretty much at the very beginning of this reading group. Today's discussion is going to be chapters 14 through 19. We will be finishing the book next week. We didn't talk about this before, but I assume that's just about enough pages for us to finish in a week's worth of reading. We read approximately 100 pages every week. These discussion groups are open to anybody interested. I think we have room for maybe one more person if anybody's interested in joining us or talking to us about these on the forum. Consider checking out the pagechewing forum. With me, I have the usual group of friends to go around introducing themselves and talk about what they're most interested in discussing today. Dan.
Yeah, I'm Dan. I'm rereading this book for a third time or something. What am I interested in reading? I'm actually not sure because I read these chapters like some weeks ago and I can't remember where they start and when we ended the last discussion. So I'll have to
you
figure
just want
it
to
out.
be reminded generally about what
Yeah. When you're reminded, then I'll be like, yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess we'll give Steve a few minutes to make sure he comes on. Shannon, do you want to go next?
Sure, Shannon. And I think I'm most interested in talking about chapter 15 when we get our first look at the wagon. That's inside Dragnapur and all that.
I'm Carl, and I lit a candle just because Varsha apparently
It's because, Carl, last time when I said we don't set fires, you said speak for yourself.
Oh, that's right. Okay, there you go. I should have known that I was like, I spout off a lot of nonsense, so I was like, it must be something I said. I also not infrequently do light candles whenever we're doing these recordings. Maybe a bad omen right now, though, because I am on the west side of Los Angeles, and for anyone who doesn't know, there are giant fires going on in northern part of Los Angeles right now. So air quality is horrible where I am, and hopefully the fire does not reach me. It's been bad. Anyway, that's a sidebar. I am most excited to talk about maybe everything to do with the Jagged Tyrant, and I think in particular the relationship between the Jagged and the Talani Mess, the fiery Talani Mess, as we learn.
Nice. I like that. All good options so far. Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steven from pagechewing, and I'm most excited to talk about Hairlock and whether or not this is the last time we see him.
He got broken into pieces, no? Yes, that's
He got
true.
chewed up like a dog toy. I got a little food toy, but that made me sad because I like Hairlock.
Oh.
You guys
Hairlock
seem like
is great.
Starry, and she's a killer, so give me Hairlock.
Okay, well, Sari got, exorcised. The demons were literally, or gods, as it were exorcised from her. So now she's just a sweet, innocent child.
Very sweet.
Who may or may not have to grapple with the trauma that she went through when she was not in control of her body.
Which actually segues nicely into the thing that I want to talk about the most, which is the stark difference between Sori and Apsara and how well done that bit was, where like they just feel like two different people, which is nice because they are. So
I also think, sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, no pun intended. I love the romance between Crocus and Apsalar. It's very wholesome. It's like a weirdly just quiet, wholesome bit in this book, amidst all the chaos and conspiracies and brutal murder. And I enjoy it for that. Yeah.
I think it's really sweet. This series gets a lot of criticism for its romances, I think, as far as I know. But I disagree. I really love all the relationships in these books. We'll see some more. There's one in Memories of Ice that's one of my favorites. But I think, yeah, this one's really sweet. That was the word I thought of too when I was thinking about this yesterday. Unlike Dan, I read my chapters a couple of days ago, but I also don't remember where we started. It has to be something to do with Parand, right?
We know it's Lorne, actually, and
Lorne,
Tool.
okay.
And me discovering that they straight up tell you so much about how the Warrens work in this book, which is crazy
Oh,
because
that's
I
right.
remember like finishing this first book and being like, I have no idea what's going on with the Warrens and which Warren is which. And maybe it's just because like a lot of information is thrown at you, so it's hard to absorb it all, all the weird fantasy terms. But Tool just like explains
Yes.
the relationship between the Jagged and the Talani Mass and how their Warrens are sort of connected, they're touching, and in contention. And we learn about, the curled, curled Ghislaine. No,
Mhm.
well, we do,
Yes.
but also Starval Dimmelane, which is the Warren of Dragons, and curled Ghislaine, which is the Warren of Darkness, and it is wild to me how much is just like straight up said that I had completely like it. I swear it took me like 3 books to realize
Yes.
like how all this stuff was working. And I guess that just goes to show like, if you take things like slow and like kind of really, take your time with these books, like it's maybe not like there are times where things are like very confusing, but some of this is like, it's on the page. It's just a lot of information. And so if you don't rush through it, as I definitely did the first time I read Gardens of the Moon, it's maybe a little more digestible.
But I guess it's not too relevant to following the story, so you kind of, it's easy to overlook because it maybe becomes more relevant later on, right? So you can easily just don't pick
That's
it
a
up.
great point. Where like while the exposition feels natural, like what they're talking about, like it makes sense. It doesn't feel like it's forced in there. It's also not like really that relevant to understand, the relationship between Telon, the Talani Mass Warren, and Omtos Falak, the Jagged Warren. Like, and that one is ice and the other is fire is like not crucial information or necessary. Like it's not immediately plot relevant.
For the current plot, yeah.
What I got though, I think from this book is general impressions of things, if that makes sense. Like
Right.
the severe enmity between the Tilan Imas and the Jagut.
Yes.
I think that is most revisited in the third book, and I remembered it for then because the prologue in that book refers back to this, and I sort of knew enough to understand the relevance of the prologue, I think. And yeah, and also I think there's this terms that we're meeting for the first time, right? Like Kural Ghislaine, having read the books, it means something to me. So the explanation makes more sense now, or like I understand it more. Versus the first time around, it's like reading a different language with other words that I understand, but it's still not making a lot of sense to me. So it's just, and all of this is hammered in quite a bit. Like we know, I think soon, that this is the Warren of Darkness and what that could, what's the word I'm looking for? Not means, because I don't think we fully understand what it means, but what it entails, like what the impact could be or the fallout for various things. So, yeah, I guess that's my larger point. But on that subject, I wanted to bring up the idea of, I guess, the source of this mythology from our world's mythology, because this felt, and it is to a great extent, very interesting and unique to me, the darkness and the idea of like the darkness giving birth to the light and so on, or like somehow light arising from this, which there were 2 parts to it. One is that reminds me of the Big Bang, which I don't think this is based on, but also real world mythology reminds me of Big Bang. And I'm not saying, I saw a Reddit post about how ancient Indians and Greeks knew about the Big Bang. That's bullshit, but it's possible that the theories of the Big Bang were also inspired to some extent by mythology, like the goddess Nyx and the god of chaos, whose name I now forget but starts with an E, whose description also sounds very similar to the way the Warden of Chaos was described as, like the gap between wardens, like the void between spaces that you can't really describe or grasp, right? So I do wonder about the mythological origins of this, and maybe to a certain extent about the scientific origins of this world building.
I think the Big Bang Theory originates from very likely originates from the Christian mythology, because the guy that formulated first was a priest, was a Catholic priest, if I remember correctly. So I assume some of his thought probably came from Genesis and stuff like that. But yeah, like you said, I think it's fairly common there's some sort of the light at the beginning, and then from some sort of universal darkness and stuff like that. So it is interesting that it is common to other mythologies too. Maybe it makes sense. Everything starts dark because there's nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
We need to start somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's the natural progression of thought, right? Sorry, Carl, go ahead.
I think something that's really interesting about this series in general is that the societies and their beliefs are very much treated like they are in the real world, in that it's sometimes easy to take for granted in fantasy that the lore that you learn about the past, particularly if there are gods that exist, are factual. Maybe they're slanted in some way, but it's often kind of taken for granted that, like, oh, if this thing happens, like, that's just how it went, And I'm trying to talk about this with dancing around spoilers, but basically that, not every story that's told is true here. And in fact, some of them may be outright fabrications. I mean, obviously, we are continuing to unpack the conspiracy of that's going on with the Malazan army and the Empress and Taishran and all of that, and the question of who's guilty of what. But the same is true for these older stories about, well, how did the conflict begin between the Jagged and what were just then known as the Imass, before they were the Talon Imass, and then going back even further to Mother Dark birthing Light, Father Light. Is that how it went down? Or is it just a myth? Is it just a belief? Is it a metaphor, or did that literally happen? Because this maybe it did, right? But the fact that, like, it's not necessarily, you should not be taking these stories for granted, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And that's something I appreciate about this, where there's a lot of nuance in terms of, like, people aren't necessarily always manipulating the faiths and the beliefs and the mythologies that you discover in this series. But just because someone, tells you a story, that doesn't necessarily mean that story is the 100% or even like 80%, truth. They may be just beliefs, and yeah, that's my thought on that.
Nice. To find out more, read the Forge of Darkness. What is that called? The Karkaris Trilogy. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. And even the rest of the books in this, what is the word for a 10-book series? Well, 10-book series. I'm not going to go into there. Is it decology? Anyway.
Maybe.
You learn more, I will say, and you hear more stories and more belief systems. And I think you are invited to question all of them, because there's no way necessarily to know unless you were there, a million years ago, or like whenever all this stuff with Mother Dark went down. All you know is Mother Dark is a being that exists, right? Because the gods are very real and they are actively influencing things in this world. So I guess kind of tying into all this, since we're starting here, I am really latching onto, I think I've talked about this in the other episodes, Lauren's character arc, and how she, in many ways, to me, feels like an embodiment of um, the empire itself. And it's I think we're invited, and based on some of the poems here and things like that, to wonder if the Malazan Empire is going to last much longer, and or if they're going to suffer divisions or things like that. And to me, she is very much an embodiment of like almost kind of the empire turning on itself, and both as someone who was conquered by the empire and then became like one of their top agents, who now is questioning everything she believed, but is still going along with it. Like she's still trying to resurrect the jagged tyrant, even though, she thinks this is horrible. Everyone around us is saying this is horrible, including Tool, who is himself being a tool, and in terms of helping them, resurrect this thing. And it goes into, the themes that you talked about before, Varsha, about manipulation, and, the symbol of the marionette, right, is a classic one, but how all of these characters are in some way, all the main ones are being manipulated by outside forces, sometimes very literally in terms of like the possession of Sari, and sometimes in less direct ways, like with Adjunct Lorne, who has essentially eaten up the imperial propaganda and is now grappling with the fact that she has been essentially a marionette. And, what she wants and what the Empire wants may be very different, or what she feels is right and what the Empire tells her is right or tells her to do may be very different. And it certainly, invites you to, God, I don't know why I keep using that phrase, but it invites you to question your own worldview and kind of your own puppet masters. And what, I think the idea of like a god possessing someone is in many ways a very direct like metaphor for the way that like a belief system can define a person and make them act out in ways that maybe they otherwise wouldn't, right? And that we all have our own gods, sometimes literally, sometimes, it's just structures that manipulate us in our day-to-day life in terms of like allowing them to define how we act, even when sometimes we feel that it's wrong.
That is a great point. I didn't think of Lorne within my framework of characters who are being controlled or manipulated, but Lorne is a great example. Like I think she very much belongs there, and she's also an interesting, say, counterpoint to Paran, especially in these chapters, because of that thought process she has about, basically deleting the woman Lorne and doing what the Empire needs her to do, and it's almost a willing submission. I kind of got the sense that she's hiding some deeper pain by doing that. Maybe it goes back to the trauma she went through as a child. But then there's Paran, who was subjected, like who was bound against his will, and he's taking control back. And Lorne thought she was in control, but realized not really. And she's willing to submit herself more willingly to that point. So yeah, I guess that's an interesting counterpoint, and also like maybe metaphorical for, say, some religious beliefs or like mechanisms, like the way people submit themselves to religious organizations or any other like higher order belief that they think.
Well, and I think it goes beyond just like kind of traditional religion too, in terms of like, literally the social structures we create, the governments we create, the economies we live in, whatever, like these things, obviously, like many of them have very like literal practical values, but also they come from a concept that like we essentially, it's like a big quiet agreement that we all go along with these things, right? And it's the same idea behind a king, right? Like you believe for whatever reason that like this one person should leave you or lead you, excuse me. And I even the concept, like as someone who's doesn't believe in a higher power, one of the things that's kind of helped me adjust my worldview and be more comfortable with people who do, and like even institutions, religious institutions, is that like we don't, like, justice isn't something that just exists, right?
Mm.
Like we create justice, we decide what that is, and it's a constant debate, right? And so there are so many aspects of our like that are crucial to the way we live our lives every day that do not have material value, that we assign them value. We create them in a very literal way. And I think Lauren is absolutely an example of like, she's not driven by like religious fervor, but she is driven by this fundamental belief in the empire and that she is an agent of it, and what she is doing is right because the empire is right. And to again, it's like in some ways it's actually like shockingly, in a very fantasy way, explicit in terms of like Onos to Ulan, the name he takes is Tool. He literally calls himself, or actually she calls him first, a tool. It's like making freaking Hairlock, who rest in pieces, a literal marionette, right? And I mean, the thing that kind of manipulates Hairlock, it isn't explored as much. And I actually wish we got to see more from him and more from his POV.
Yeah.
I think that's a potential flaw of the book, was that he maybe could have been explored more. But he's essentially driven mad through chaos energy. Like he goes in the Warrens. I mean, that's what we're led to believe. It influences him and basically makes him mad and makes him, violently dangerous. And of course, he was an unpleasant person before that, so I'm sure that didn't help. But that's sort of what's manipulating him, right? Is this chaotic energy he's exposed himself to. And yeah, anyway, I think I'm talking in circles now, but
that does bring up the point that Steve wanted to talk about. Do you want to discuss that now, or should we wait until we get to that point later on when he does? Maybe we'll.
wait. You can
Yeah,
do chronological order.
Okay. And just there was this other interesting bit in that section with Tool and Lorne, where he talks about how the tyrant is capable of delivering the single punishment that he fears most, and the punishment is enslavement, which again, in the context of Lorne's thoughts, is interesting because she's not quite enslaved, but I think she is a little bit. That seems like too strong a word, but there are some mental chains that are bonding her there to
absolutely.
the empire.
Absolutely.
And was
I-
this
I-
also... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, continuing all of that too, like it leads to like really, I feel like a lot of the dynamic there is encapsulated in the scene of the big fight scene that breaks out like so randomly and abruptly between, our Three Musketeers party and Lorne and Tool, where like that didn't need to happen, but
Yeah.
they kind of freaked out on all sides and made a lot of rash judgments, and people got severely injured and almost died. And it just seems like such, them letting their chains kind of define them. And obviously, as we will see, I think it's interesting using the word chains, but that is a potent symbol with very real meaning and value in this series, although we haven't gotten there yet.
We did a little bit on a
little bit.
different kind of chain.
Yeah.
Jagnipur. But yeah, and I also love the tiny moment she gives herself to wonder, was that really necessary? Did I need to attack them? Could I have talked to them first? And then, oh my God, the exchange between her and Crocus after that, when he's like, we meant no harm, you can just leave us alone. And she's like, yeah, okay, you can go.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, I think she even thinks, oh, I usually would have just killed him just to be sure, right?
Yeah. So I don't know, it's almost like she's trying. Yeah, this whole crisis she's having about who she is as a person, with most of it being Lorne, the adjunct, but giving herself some room for maneuvering. I think, yeah, that again reminds me of the way the girl who is now Upsalar was trapped inside Sori's head, just like the tiny bit of identity that she had and could maneuver with. Anyway, was this also the section where we got information about the time, the notion of being trapped in time, and the history
Yeah.
of the world,
Yeah.
with just how long this tyrant has been imprisoned there? And did that make you want to shake the book and and say, what the hell are you playing at, Lassine? Why would you release this guy who's been imprisoned
know.
for so long?
It really does. This book really does make you like question her judgment and hate her, and like it just seems like such a horrible idea, you know, on a moral level and even a practical level. Like you're like you finally are told the logic behind it, right? Which is essentially you're releasing something that you know Animander Rake will like just feel compelled to face that off with, and it will either weaken him or kill him. And at that point, you strike. And so there is like some strategic mindedness to it, but there are so many things that like it seems so obvious. So many things could go wrong here, and not least of which is just a lot of people are going to die. What are you do? It's so cold hearted and also borderline insipid, and it's oh my god, crazy, an absolutely crazy plan.
Yeah. And even the people that we've sort of grown to love, like you have to, I don't know, like shake your head at what they are planning. They went ahead and mined the city anyway so that they can leave it in just enough chaos that Dujek can come and, you know, be the Lord and Savior and become the leader of the city, right? So
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I didn't realize that already in the first book they were talking about the Panion Seer.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just like it kind of came from nothing. I was like, wait, oh, we're already talking about that, sort of.
yeah, that bit I did notice and track back to the third book when they bring him up again. Because I think all long series have to do this, set something up for the next book. And this didn't, given how late it came in this book, it didn't seem like something that they would address here. So I sort of had that thread hanging open for the next books.
Yeah. Maybe they forgot that they were involved at all with that.
He does.
Yeah.
The Panion Seer is mentioned earlier too, but like very like in passing. Like just it's like one of those throwaway, like you would easily skip over it or forget it very quickly because it's just like another name you're told amidst it all, and it's not relevant. But it is one with context that, or in hindsight rather, and context, that you stood out to me, certainly. That I was like, oh yeah, and needless to say, that's something, I mean, it's not a spoiler, like that they explicitly, they have a conversation where they're basically like, you know, next season, we're going to deal with the Panion Seer, right? And so, like, they talk about it. It's like literally they're setting up what's coming next. And there's a lot to be unpacked there.
I do look forward to that because I do like that book quite a lot. It's my second favorite.
Memories of Ice?
Whichever book it is that deals with the Panion Seer. I can't remember the names.
It is Memories of Ice.
Yeah, that is my favorite. Now I'm curious about what your favorite is.
Again, I feel like it's like not even a big deal because it's just, they're like in the most explicit foreshadowing are like, we're going to do this next. This is literally the next thing we're going to do. Are you with us or not? And so it's coming, you know, that's not like something that's mentioned and discussed in detail for no reason.
What's your favorite book, Dan? Like of the series?
The second book, the one with it's also mentioned by Dujek literally in this section what they're going to do in the next book. So
okay,
right,
got it.
It's what's going to happen, right? So
yeah. So going back to our Three Musketeers, isn't it cool how much of a badass Skoll turned out to be? Well, sort of. Like he did get destroyed by Lorne, but that's because she had an autotunnel sword. And Well,
he does feel cool, but he also doesn't like really do anything
Yeah.
there.
yeah.
Like he kind of goes down like a punk. At the same time, like he sits. My favorite scene in these chapters is him and Perrin just shooting the
Oh,
shit.
yes.
I
Yeah.
love it. I think this is some of like Erikson at his best is when he's just like has two characters just like talking, and it feels so human, and you just like come to love them both more. And these unexpected pairings, right? These people you would never imagine are going to be hanging out together, and they are just through fate, chance, as it were. And it's lovely. I love that, and the care that they immediately, that they take care of each other. And Perrin, is going out of his way to help Cole survive a deadly wound.
Really interesting. Because to me, the most interesting parts of these books are like the action, like the big sprawling action scenes and the exposition. To me, that's like the best Erikson. And then these character parts, I'm like, they're fine, but they don't do it super to me compared to other ones. So it's kind of like that's interesting how it's almost the opposite of what you're into the character moment. You said it's the best, and I'm like, oh, the other thing.
I hear you that like the big epic fantasy stuff, I eat that up. The lore, the big, set pieces. But, and the first time I read this book, this scene did not stand up to the extent that I didn't even remember it was in the book. And it was like reading it fresh. But that is something that I think with being more comfortable in the world, I'm appreciating a lot of the quiet character moments more. And that is something that I've also felt like I came to appreciate on my first read through with the later books. Once again, I was more comfortable in the world and comfortable following what was going on. That I felt like, two characters just sitting down and having a conversation was a lot more enjoyable to me because I wasn't like on the edge of my seat being like, what's going on? What are they talking about? Where are we? Who are these people?
Makes sense.
And it goes, to the girl now called Absalar and Crocus as well, where I think, I didn't care as much about their romance on the first time through. Like I was like, okay, that's neat. But like, I really appreciated their conversation at the end of this whole section we read, talking about the Gardens of the Moon, right? I don't think she explicitly says it, but like, this is where, the book gets its title. And it just felt very innocent and sweet amidst it all. And I found touching and very humanizing amidst all the conspiracies and military maneuvering and gods and monsters.
Yeah, that was a very sweet moment. Shannon, which is it for you, the character moments or the action scenes?
I think the character bits are the stuff that works the best for me. His Erikson writes buddy duos really well, and so those are usually some of the most fun for me.
Yeah. I think the thing about the Call Paran interaction, again, like you kind of expect it to go in a very antagonistic manner because they are from opposite sides, but they're just nice to each other. And
They can tease each other and like take care of each other. I mean, it's just these two strangers in the wild who, come from opposing sides in this conflict. And yet they take a liking to each other, and they take care of each other. And it just felt very like the better part of human nature, is like when we are being the best version of ourselves, like that's us. That's what we're like, and that is something I appreciate about Steven Erikson is he shows the best and the worst. And certainly his more heroic characters are the ones who are at least trying to be that better part, who sits around a fire and takes care of a stranger who may be dying otherwise.
And I mean, not that this is the entirety of the reason, but he does want to look out for him, but also he's like, yeah, maybe I can enter the city more easily if
For sure.
I go with this guy. So there's like a tiny bit of a selfish reason there, but then he sees Kalam there and he's like, go bring me the heater, and immediately he takes action when he realizes there's something he can do to help him. I think, yeah, that whole sequence was brilliant. There was this line about Carl in his armor. A sponge squeezed beneath the burden of armor. See the man down our precious water. See it immediately reappear salty and grimy on his weathered skin. Crab being salty about the fact that Carl has his heavy armor, so he needs all this water. That was brilliant.
I love Krupp. Nothing but respect for my man Krupp.
Yeah. And also Carl earlier, he seems to know all these things somehow. Again, we don't know earlier if it was some god speaking through him when he just randomly woke up and said there are 5 dragons on Moonspawn. And now I guess he knows to be prepared for bad things to happen. So yeah, I'm warming up to Carl quite a bit here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's not too much left to be with him, probably. I mean, the book is almost ended, but we're getting towards the end, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I remembered in my mind a lot more with these characters, like more chapters than we actually get. Because if we think about it, we actually don't get too much,
No,
right?
absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
like we get, introduced, like one scene them talking, maybe something else talking to someone else, then they go outside and now they're coming back again. Like, it's actually like just a couple of things that they did. But in my mind, I thought it was a whole thing.
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
I-
is
Yeah, I get that. And I think this is true of all the books. Like, the actual time we spend with each character is very little across the book. But then over the course of the scenes, I think enough of a picture is built up that feels like a lot.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Also helps when the books are as big as they are, so that like, even the relative, like, I'm sure if we just looked at like sheer word count, the amount of time we spend with like Crocus, for example, in this book alone is like equivalent to many, beloved side characters in like a Jane Austen novel or something.
Hmm.
But certainly in the scope of the story, right? It is surprising how little space these characters take up.
Yeah.
And going back to the bit about action scenes, you guys have heard me go on and on about how much I dislike them and skip over them during our second Apocalypse read. But these ones, I don't know if it's because they are one-on-one action scenes, like a small group of people and not the high-level view of wars that we got. These ones were very engaging, and I find that that's generally has been true across the books. Like, there hasn't been very many action scenes that I've skimmed read or had my eyes glaze over for. I do engage and follow along with the action sequences, which is interesting. Like, I'd like to decipher what it is about these particular ones that don't make me want to, like, just, okay, let's move on to the next bit.
This is something that I think about not infrequently. Because I'm similar to you, Varsha, that like oftentimes action scenes in books, like my eyes glazed over and I just like check out mentally and I'm bored and I'm like trying to get to like the next big, like when things change. And I think a big part of when it works is like when it feels like it's grounded in character in some way, so that there's like emotional depth. Like you feel like what matters is actively changing and affecting the characters, And then also, it certainly helps if, like, in some way, I think you can, like, on a sentence-by-sentence level, follow what's going on, and you don't just feel completely lost, because then it's easy to just be like, okay, well, it's chaos, and I get it. It's chaos, but, like, then I'm checked out, And then beyond that, they don't overstay their welcome. Like, his action scenes are, like, pretty short,
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't take that long. It's not several pages. It's, like, maybe a page.
Yeah. And in fact, that's a great point, because the first time I read this, my memory from the Dragnipur scenes was like, I almost felt like it went on for pages and pages. Maybe because of what happens there, this whole, the dragging down feeling that being inside the sword gives you. But really, it was just 2 pages at most, maybe a page and a half in the trade
Yeah.
paperback. It wasn't very long. So I was surprised at my memory because that action scene again felt like it was very significant and went on for a long time in my head. But the actual pages were like a page and a half or something.
Absolutely. It's the impact of the scene too, right? I mean, that's getting to, to what Dan was talking about with like the characters too. I feel like one of the visuals that I carried most strongly from this book, from the first time reading this book, was of the inn and the characters like Crocus and Murillo and Malik, not Malikrel. I always do this. What is his name? What is the assassin's name?
Relic?
Yes, Ralignam. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm terrible with these names. But like them all just and Call and like them just like sitting around and like their camaraderie. It was just something about that was like a visual that was like really potent in my mind. And I think it is through the prose itself, but also the significance of certain scenes to the characters. I think it really helps bring things alive and make them feel like they maybe take up more space than they do.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to finish by saying, like, in contrast, I'm not blown away by Talk the Younger's role in this book. And I do think that, like, there is something that, like, it's just not as emotionally involving his sections in the book. And so it's not as maybe memorable. And there aren't necessarily as many visuals that stand out so much as, other than his like eye patch, when you think of him, as opposed to like the chains, the wheelbarrow, Draknapur, the damned souls, effectively, the imagery there is powerful. And so, it's going to stand out to you when compared to like the rest of the book.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't remember this ignominious, is that the right word, ending for Talk in this book. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll go back to that character. Maybe we won't. We'll find out. But you mentioned the Raylignum scene, right, with the Tataril powder. I think that was another one that in my head I seem to recall that was like a really long action sequence, which again it wasn't half a page. That was
Yeah,
it.
it's like a page, half a page.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ocelot was a character I felt like was in more of the book. And I guess it's just because I just really don't like him, and his death was really satisfying, Because, like, he's not in the book very much. Like, I was shocked. Like, oh, wait, that's it. Like, he's done. And I guess I just, like, really enjoyed seeing Ralignam turn on him and everything that happened there.
Did we see enough of Ocelot to develop an opinion of him? I feel like he's just there, someone who conveys
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
wishes.
we don't know a lot about him as a person, certainly.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I don't know.
I guess we get to the point where, what's the thing? Oh, Quickpen is going to chop down Hairlock's threads.
That was great. That whole sequence was awesome. Poor Hairlock.
Yes. Steve, can you still hear us? Or I don't know. Oh, good. Okay.
Hilarious.
Do you want to bring up your thing now with Hairlock and the pieces that he may or may not be resting in?
I just love the whole sequence there with turning it into the warren and Quickpen cutting the strings that tied him and refusing to throw him through the warren to save him from the hounds. That was really fun. Sad but fun.
It's crazy how it just like comes full circle. Like he Quickpen. I remembered Hairlock, but I did not remember that Hairlock created, or that Quickpen created Hairlock. Excuse me, or the marionette, body for Hairlock. And then he's also the one who ultimately cuts the strings, right? It all comes full circle there.
Yeah, and it's a little like, okay, of course it is, but I didn't think of the threads thing as the bit that controls the puppet until this scene. And
Mhm.
when that gets chopped and he just sort of flops over, that was brilliant.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, exactly. It makes so much sense. It's like, that's what that means. That's what's up with the strings. So
I love, and the hounds making a toy of him was just, it's so good.
yes.
Yeah. One thing I was kind of confused about that scene was when Shadowthrone comes up, right? And he talks to the Dark Elf guy.
Animander Rake.
Yeah, Animator Ray. We talked to him and he's like, what is it? He's like, oh, you didn't have, why did you kill my dogs or something like that? To be, he doesn't seem super angry about it. But I don't know, because when I read it, I'm like, shit, like you have 12 legendary, is it 12? No,
Oh, yeah.
it's 12? Okay. You have 12 legendary hounds, and they each have their name, and they form a nice set, and you lose 3 of them, and it's kind of like, I would be livid. You know what I mean? It's very, I don't know, when
Because
you
he
have,
broke into your collection of
well, no,
hounds.
because when you have sets of things, like losing one, like it feels like it should be important or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me, but it just feels
No,
wrong.
I
Sorry,
agree with you. I think this seems like a nice number. Like, this is how many there should be.
Yeah, because like to me, it pays to read it. It could have been like, oh, what if I don't have? We lost 2 of the 12 hounds. It's like
Yeah.
that feels that sucks.
It's now 10, so that's a pretty nice even number, right? But also, I don't know if you realize this, but Shadowthrone's just a cat guy, so
Yeah, I see. I don't know, but I just thought he was a bit too nonchalant about it, because I was a lot more distraught
Upset.
about it than he was.
You cared more for his dogs than he. But I don't know. Given already what we know of Shadowthrone, do you think there's anything that would like bring out an upset reaction from him?
I mean, he was angry about Hairlock, and Hairlock did, what did he do? He just went around things. He didn't even, Anoantarek did something worse, I feel. So if I was Shadowthrone, I would be like, we don't know, I guess. But I would be angry, and I would be plotting against
That's
Anoantarek.
true.
he was also pissed about Quickben. When
Yeah.
he realizes
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna mention
Quickben is,
Quickben.
he was like, he like loses his shit.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, but it feels very performative. That makes sense. Like when Quickben enters the realm, all these hounds are howling. He cackles when Quickben, like it's a very visible visual expression of anger, which I don't know whether I should take seriously. Like, I mean, I am sure that his need for revenge, he's being very serious about that. So his lack of reaction here, I'm not reading into it. Like, maybe he's, secretly
Okay.
already plotting her revenge, but we're just
I'm
not
gonna
seeing
get you
it.
for killing my dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. It just feels bad to lose what I see? Like a non-renewable resource. It's like a finite resource. We can't get more hound. You know what I mean?
Well, you can, because some
mean,
of
we
the
don't know,
hounds, some of the hounds are children of the other hounds.
Sure,
So
they clearly can breed.
I guess, but I sort of interpret it the same way as you interpret, like there's the Norse gods, and it's like, oh, this guy is the son of this god, but there's no sense of progression that you're going to get more and more gods in these sort of mythologies. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, yes, they're the son of thing, but they're kind of static at this point, sort of. I don't know. It really upset me.
I like too how it's like, it's the number, it's like the iconography of the dogs, and not the fact that it's just like 2 dogs who are being killed that upset. It's like these 2 livings, like not just like sentient, they're like sapient. Like these things are as smart as any person, but
I don't know. I just don't like losing finite resources.
I know you want to complete the set of Infinity Stones.
I don't know. Because I was reading, I was feeling like, I was also thinking, why does this upset me so much? it's just an irrational thing. I don't understand why this upset me so much, but it did. So hopefully we'll see. But maybe we'll come back actually, because what we see after is Paran helps them go into some other dimension or something. We don't know. Right.
Yeah.
So to me, that sets it up like we're gonna come back to me.
Yeah, a lot of people get dumped into other dimensions, right? Like Talk the Younger got pulled into something. These two dogs went somewhere. I know what Hairlock was just pieces, right? He didn't go anywhere. He was begging to be
destroyed.
thrown in. Yeah, he was begging to be thrown into a warren. And who was it? Was it Paran? Refused. Like, nope, not interested. Bye.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, this was a cool chapter.
Should we, I mean, going off this, go from, we already kind of discussed a little bit, but Anamanda Rake and Dragnapur and all the reveals there. I know, Shannon, that was one of the things you were excited to discuss, stood out to you.
Yeah, let me see. Here we go. Let me try to find it here. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoy going into Dragnapur and seeing what all's in there. And it's bizarre. And, now having read more of the series, I kind of more understand what's going on there. Because I remember when I first read it, I'm like, what is this? I don't know what any of this means.
I love, again, the imagery. It's very gothic and epic and sad.
Yeah.
It's very tragic. A lot of discussions in the epigraphs around here about December, the god of tragedy and tragedy in general. And I definitely felt that coming through in these pages, that a lot of tragic stuff happens. Although certainly a lot of people are still alive. So
yeah. And
Well,
it's pretty interesting, like the fact that there's a carriage inside a sword, like the whole thing with the chain. It's very different than what you've seen before. I don't know. Even, the idea of like a dimension inside a sword, and then there's like a carriage. I don't know if we're gonna figure out why there's a carriage, or like why specifically a carriage, or what's the lore behind it. But I look forward to it.
One question I did have when I was reading it was, is Dragnapur a warren? I mean, is that actually a warren inside of that sword? Like, I don't know. I
thought they said, but maybe I'm not sure.
Did they say it?
I thought they said it's a warren. I thought
it's a warren. So it's its own separate warren?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't know. And
I
don't know
seem to recall that too. Yeah. Steve, were you saying something?
I thought it was its own warrant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough. And I don't know if anyone also, like, I imagine it. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the cover of the King Diamond album, Abigail. That's how I imagine it. Well,
No.
if you are, you know what I'm thinking about. There's a very big Gothic carriage in front of it. But yeah, it's I imagine it as very dark blue, dark black sort of tones. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I see it. Minus the horses.
Yeah.
But yes, I like dark because everything inside this sword feels very dark to me, or like grayish green, no blues.
Oh,
Yeah.
you have beige and green. Interesting. I'm with Dan that it's all blue, purple, black, gray.
Interesting.
Very, very like midnight colors in my
I guess
head.
maybe influenced by like the sort of dark elf aesthetic from
I think
D&D,
that
right?
absolutely has to be influencing it in my head.
Maybe in my head, purple is a bit of a brighter color that I associate with more joy, and there is absolutely no joy.
Really? You associate purple with joy. I associate it with, I don't know, nobles and intrigue and, I don't know, not like bright feeling. You know what I mean?
Okay, the only reason it's associated with joy is because I love that color and I'll put it on anything and everything, except Yeah. That's right. It brings
It's more
me
like
joy.
I don't know, like a deep, like a color of intrigue or something of,
Mm,
politics.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Interesting.
I do
Yeah.
feel like there's something that like I do associate too with like mystery and
Mm,
like a certain shade of purple too, particularly like the lighting.
Mm,
There's something very uh yeah,
moody.
mm,
moody, mysterious, very gothic. Like
interesting.
maybe I've just seen too many of the old Hammer gothic horror
Yeah.
movies where like that kind of color they're like the deep reds too.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um Dragnipur is such an interesting, like, it is such a badass concept, but it's also one where you sit with it and you're like, this is horrifying. And it's crazy to think that, like, Rake, who we are increasingly given reason to believe is, like, a fairly moral person, is, like, this is horrible. Like, it is horrible. He's personally creating this hell, and certainly the story of Dragnipur is a little bit longer than just Rake, as we will discover. But like, I just can't. This is one of those things that I just like struggle to wrap my head around. Like, why is he okay with this? Why is this something like he acts out of like seemingly very like noble intentions a lot of the time, and now not now. I mean, for a long time, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, he's just been like anyone he kills, he entraps in his sword for all eternity. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. I mean, we get a whole section in this section about him discussing his motivations, right? Which seem to be related to honor
Right.
and some sort of, dignity and stuff like that. But like you said, it's a bit
And keeping
interesting.
keeping his people going. They're all
Yeah,
depressed and
yeah.
aimless, and so
Well,
he's
this
like,
is
give them.
it is similar to some other series we read about people that live a long time, but
Yes.
it's not
Yeah.
as depressing, I guess, it's solution. But it's still they're still drifting. They're still like decaying in some way mentally. You know what I mean? Like, or morally, maybe not morally, but become more apathetic. And it's not like a boon to live forever,
No,
right?
it's definitely no elves, and well, I mean, even the elves in Lord of the Rings are tragic because they're fading, right?
Yeah,
And
but they're, how do
this
I
is
say it?
to me a more
Yeah,
psychological and therefore maybe a more emotionally impactful, at least for me personally, version of
yeah,
that, where it's like these people are just like fucking depressed, you know? They've like
Yeah.
gone through unimaginable tragedy because they've lived for hundreds of
mm,
thousands of years. And so life just seems like meaningless and sad to them. And it's like, how do you find meaning when you've seen so much and
yeah.
you've gone on so long? I mean, yeah, the non-men, spoiler, like, right, are very different in some ways, but also tragic and definitely more messed up.
Maybe
Whereas,
this is sort of midway between the Tolkien
yeah,
elves and the non-men sort of thing.
yeah, it's it is sad. I do feel sad when I think of Latisse Andi, and
Yeah. So he's
it,
basically just trying to give them something to do, like give them motivation to do anything, right?
yeah. Something that I think about when I read these stories about these like long-lived immortals and how much their lives suck is this like, because I feel like it's a fairly common story actually, and it's told in a lot of different ways. But like, how often do you see immortality being awesome? You know what I mean? Like, it's very rarely something where like the immortal is like having a great time. Oftentimes it's like a curse more than a blessing. And I wonder if that's like us, like human beings, trying to tell ourselves it's better that we die so early so that we don't, like, it's us essentially like self-soothing, you know? Like, again, it's like, how often do you see an immortal who's like, my life's awesome, you know? I don't have to worry about dying, or like, unless I'm just like not stupid, and I've seen a lot of terrible shit, but I've also seen cool shit, and there's always new things to explore and learn, and new people to meet and love, and you just never see that. And I'm not saying that is how people would be as immortals, right? Like, it's really a
Mm.
philosophical question as much as anything. But I think it's interesting that it always seems to be like being immortal sucks. and it is tragic. And, despite the fact that, like, so much of when humans are made immortal in stories, the real tragedy is everyone they love dies around them.
Yeah.
And here, it's like, yeah, some of their loved ones die, but also they're all like Tistandi, and so they all theoretically are like immortal. So, they're all together, and they don't have that tragic element. It's like a deeper sense of, like, they can lose each other, they can die, but it really is like a deeper sense of ennui, that, like, it's this psychological, philosophical meaninglessness, right, coming up against nihilism. That is, I don't know, it's interesting. It's something I think about when I read
Do you
about the Tistandi.
do you think there's also the sense of maybe not feeling relevant anymore that gets exaggerated a lot more when you live for tens of thousands of years? Like, I mean, as we grow older, I think we start to think that, it's hard to not think that you're being sort of phased out, or your thoughts are old-fashioned and whatnot. I think that's sort of something that we go through as we get older, and take that and multiply it over tens of thousands of years. Maybe that, I don't know. But also, when
That's
you
an
live
interesting
that,
idea.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you live that long, you can maybe also find ways to stay relevant. You have like who is it? Baruch thinks to himself, he has all the time in the world. Of course, he's read Mammoth's histories, so maybe they have time to, but
Yeah,
but also, I guess the trying and needing to feel important, that might hurt.
Yeah. But I don't know, like you, Varsha, how much time do you have to study Gen Z lingo in your normal life to stay relevant? You know what I mean?
I don't even know if I want to.
But, or also think about, if you think about all the new books coming out all the time and stuff like
Yeah,
that, it's you can't keep up with everything,
that's true.
No,
Yeah,
right?
no,
that's
and
true. Yeah.
You still need
and-
to do normal things like work. I don't know if the Tristan have to work. I assume they have to do some sort of work to maintain their society.
Mm.
right.
Okay, yeah. Then maybe it's this idea of, like, I guess things move so fast and the
Yeah.
impossibility of keeping up with it. Yeah, I like that. That could explain it.
That would get exhausting. No, I mean,
Yes.
that's a great point. Is you think, like, you've been around so long and you've literally seen species rise and fall, and your own belief structures, the things that are meaningful to you, kind of quite literally crumble around you. Going back to, like, oh, you're a slave, you're chained to whatever belief systems, whatever, what the things that drive you, and then, over a long enough time, those things are not going to exist, or not exist in the same form anymore. And yeah, that probably is really traumatic, even when loved ones aren't dying.
Yeah.
The things that define your lives and your relationships with loved ones might die. I mean, right? Like, you think of marriages, like, how many times are immortals married, right? Do they live? In Tolkien's elves, like, they get married once and they're like soulmates and they stay together forever. But, the Tistandi, I kind of get the sense, like, that's not, I imagine they probably have different relationships for the new experience, or for whatever reason, right?
Hmm.
And, that is itself, I'm sure, a very traumatic experience.
And we're also told that they are a dwindling race, so
Yeah.
they are dying, which means that those who were close to the ones who died, it must hit them that much harder, because you've not just known them over 20, 30 years, you've known them over 20, 30,000 years.
Right.
I really like this in the exchange between Ray and Baruch when he talks about his motivations. He says, "Do I raise Moonspawn into the Is it enough to preserve the Tistandi? Simply preserve them. Do I raise Moonspawn into the heavens where we live on beyond any risk, any threat? What then will I be preserving? A history, a particular point of view." And then he goes on to say that that the Tistandi point of view is one of disinterest, stoicism, and quiet, empty despair. And I do wonder if they even started out this way, if it's not just the long life that made them like this, if this is just the default. They are born with disinterest, stoicism, and empty despair. Horrible as that sounds.
That's something I'm very interested in. I haven't read Carcanus. I haven't read any of the books. And so I'm very curious to see, that trilogy takes place at a relative high point of their civilization. And so what were they like before they all dwindled?
Yeah. I am very curious about that too. I think After Toll the Hounds is one of the times that I really wanted to read more about these standee.
The way I kind of imagine like living such a long time, it would be sort of like the ship of Theseus. I don't know how it's pronounced. So but you probably can remember maybe 200 or 300 years of time, and what you remember probably defines your personality, stuff like that. So as you sort of evolve, you're literally only the last 300 years of your life, and you constantly changes the person. So you're by the end, they're like they're completely different people than when they started off, and there's almost nothing left of. We can't remember anything or something like that.
This feels like a very R. Scott Baker question thing. This feels like something he would explore. But that's
for him, though, the trauma stays with them forever, sort of.
Right.
I guess.
True. But no. I mean, it's a very interesting idea. Like the idea of like your identity and how that would change over hundreds of thousands of years. That, when are you just a completely different person?
Yeah.
What
and I'm wondering how much
is there a core inside you that stays the same, or do you? And does it matter? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Does it even exist, or are you just? I mean, that's the question of the soul, right? And yeah. I mean, for listeners who don't, in case anyone is listening, they don't know what the Ship of Theseus is. It's the like philosophical idea taken from a Greek myth that like if a ship is like repaired enough times and every part is changed out, but it like maybe functionally looks the same, but every single timber, every part of the ship has been changed out. When is it a different ship? Is it still the same ship, or is it something different?
Yeah. Especially the idea you replace it bit by bit. At some point, if you say it's a new one, at some point there needs to be a demarcation line. But then where do you put the demarcation line? Or then you just say it's the same ship.
Exactly. It's like, how do you define that? Is it still the same ship? If it's not, where is that demarcation line? It's an interesting idea, and I think even like certainly far more interesting to consider when it comes to sapient beings, like humans, like the Tistandi, like the Imass, right, who've been living for hundreds of thousands of years, being genocidal maniacs. Like, at what point are they changed too? Like Tool, and we're seeing him. Like, I bet he was not always like this. I bet he wasn't always this depressed and just like, fuck it, point me a direction and I'll kill people. Like, at what point is he a different person? That's an interesting query to ponder.
I think I may have heard of or read a version of that where like the idea that all of our cells reproduce and like die every, I don't know, what is it, 6 months, 6 years or something. So are you a different person at the end of that cycle? Which in the case of the Telanimas, no, they're dead as fuck. But
maybe our bones stay the same.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought, or brain cells at some point.
They don't reproduce, right? Yeah.
And there's some which kind of stay for a long time, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So I guess where I was going with that is that the Telanimas, at least, whatever changes they have are very mental, I think.
Yeah.
Right. And the
at the same
Tistandi
time,
also. Yeah.
They rot, like we see them and they're in differing stages of rotting. And presumably if they're in combat, they take damage. So that's going to do additional physical trauma. That has to change the way. I mean, I don't know. As someone who has had like surgeries and things and has had aspects of my like physicality change, that does affect the way you see yourself in the world, and the way you move through the world. And that does therefore change your identity. And, I wonder, how that impacts them on a scale that is so far beyond, our relatively much smaller human lives.
And do they
You know,
feel pain? Do they, I guess, to
I
quote
assume not,
Discworld,
but I don't know.
yeah.
to quote Discworld, they don't have glands, so they probably don't feel pain.
That's a really interesting question. I wonder if Erikson ever touches on that. I don't remember.
Yeah. And apparently the only way to kill them is to do to them what was done to Hairlock, which is hack them to pieces.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Shannon, were you going to say something about the whole rake question? And Tistandi? No. Yeah. Okay. What happens next? I think
Everyone comes back to the city. We start to circle back up in Darujistan.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we learn about the
the
Panionseer.
Rayleigh ignores completely the warning that he got from Baruch to not let the powder touch his skin and exclusively applies it all over his skin.
Yeah, I didn't understand why did he do that?
I think, okay, my reading of that was that he was so terrified of what he was facing, or like so worried, so not terrified of what he was facing, so terrified of failure, of the consequences of failure, that he's like, okay, if this will give me more power, screw that, I'm gonna do it.
I see.
It-
What did Baruch want him to do? It put it on his dagger or something?
Maybe like create. Yeah, I thought maybe
Throw it to
clothes
him,
and
maybe?
dagger.
Like,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see.
Because I suppose it was. We know that it's Otataral powder, right? Like the
Yeah.
same as the material that Lon sword is made of, so it's averse to magic. But yeah, that's an interesting question. I was unsure about where he expected him to put it that wouldn't make contact with skin. And like clothes, sure, but he'd have to be very careful about that. But then he has to go prepared, not in the middle of combat decide to use it.
Well,
Yeah,
I think it beyond very possibly having a physical effect, we know like exposure to magical sources changes people. I mean, Hairlock is the number one example of that, right? And so it's possible that, enough exposure to the odotaral powder would have an impact on who he is fundamentally as a person, beyond even just how he physically, whatever it does to him.
Is Ultratron magic, though? Or is it the opposite of magic? Like, I don't know. I assumed it was not magic because it made magic not work. That was my assumption, but I don't know.
No, it's I don't know. It's the opposite of magic. It's cancels out magic. I don't know. It kills magic.
How do you define it too in relation like to?
I assume it was some sort of like material, like you find it like in the ground or something. That's what I assume, but I don't know. Or is it something you need to make in a specific process? You know what I mean?
What I will say about all this is keep reading.
Okay. Fair enough.
And you may have to keep reading for a very long time, but
I see. Okay.
there are you get a lot of answers about how a lot of different things, not all the answers, there's still a lot that's very mysterious, but you learn a lot. And someday you may learn some more about how Odotaral works.
Okay. Well, that's how I think it works right now. I don't know if it's correct, but
Yeah, it does seem like a metal of some sort, or a metal. Like if you
Yeah.
can make a sword out of it, it has to be at least of the consistency
yeah.
of flint.
I assume it was something like, I don't know, maybe some god got killed in the past and his blood became the opposite of magic because it's the, I don't know, the blood of a worm. Something like some weird shit like that, I assume.
Mm.
I assume it was somewhat related to some warren or gods or something like that. But it's something you can find and manipulate. But it's not intrinsically magic, I assume. But again, I don't know.
It is cool that it's and maybe it does go to show that Rallick is being kind of stupid here. Like we know that Lauren has her sword, right? And it deadens all magic around her. Like she cannot be hit by like fireballs, and that's just a sword, right? Like it's not like she is wearing it all over her body. It has that like radiating effect. And So he probably didn't need to put it all over, but he doesn't really get it, you know? So I think he's just doing something kind of reckless because he cares, you know, and he wants to win the fight and he wants to protect Crocus. And again, that's another thing that I found very touching was when shit hit the fan, like our crew of, you know, the Three Musketeers crew, our D&D party, really stood up for each other, and they really care about each other, and we're like, you know, they're all going out of their way to take care of Crocus, you know, this dipshit kid who doesn't know nothing and is caught up through no fault of his own in literally a conflict of gods and empires. And again, kind of touching on the idea of like how much it kind of sucks to be a chosen one, you know, because he's another version of a chosen one, like Sorry was. That you're just, it is not a pleasant experience.
I guess in both our cases, though, if they were not chosen, they would have died.
Maybe.
So,
Yeah.
well, because in one case, Sorry would have been killed along with the other soldiers.
Her
And in the
dad,
other case,
remember? The dad was missing.
I assumed he got killed too. I assumed. And then Crocus also didn't get killed by the dart from the crossbow because of the coin from Upon, right?
No, that's true. It's helped keep him alive. That's definitely true.
But they wouldn't have been aiming at him if he didn't have the coin, though.
No, I
Because
think he
wasn't
was.
that Surratt after the
Yeah.
coin bear?
I think
This
that was
was early.
before. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
he's
just
about-
randomly was there. He was stealing something. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was early on. It was like when he was first introduced. And
Was
he,
it
like,
when he
happened,
was stealing from the girl's palace? That was
it
okay.
might have been. Talking about her,
Yeah.
that she,
Well, it was Surratt when she was killing that assassin that was at Cruel's Temple. I forget his
Yes.
name, but
Yeah, I think so.
the one
yeah.
that was there for one chapter. But yeah, he was a witness. She was probably going to kill him anyway.
you're right. I mean, it does keep him alive, but it just also means that
Yeah.
everyone
I
wants
feel
them.
like being the chosen one is more likely to keep you alive, but also more likely to draw a lot more attention to
Right.
you, which might not keep you alive. But
It's
at least you're not going to die in the background like all those thousands of people that get massacred in a battle, you know, in every book or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No, that's true. That's true. You're not going to be a peasant getting your farm burned down
So-
and your whole family slaughtered.
Yeah.
You know.
You're probably more likely to somewhat survive, but also maybe if you don't, your death is probably worse than if you just
Right.
randomly die in the background.
And your life will be
That's it.
difficult, right? Like you'll be dealing with constant focus and
Yeah.
from outside dangerous forces and adversity.
Yeah.
And
It's kind of like being the president of the United States. You know,
Right.
you're like, you probably have less chance of dying from, I don't know, disease or randomly some whatever normal people die of, or car accident because people drive you around, but you have a lot more people actively trying to kill you, right? So
Yeah.
and you have to make the worst decisions
yeah,
imaginable, right? The impossible decisions, like every day.
yeah,
It's yeah, exactly.
So I'm trying to think. Most Chosen One books I've read. No, that's not true. They do. I was gonna say they make it seem like this glorious thing, and yes, the character goes through a struggle of like, why me, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, it's almost like it is a good thing to be chosen. But I feel like the direction here is slightly different in terms of even hammering it into the reader that this is horrible. Don't get me like this. It's not a good thing that's happening to your characters.
It's a little more pointed.
Yeah.
I would agree with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have certain stories like The Wheel of Time that I think make a point of being like, it would suck to be the chosen one. Like your life would be really, really hard and you would have to sacrifice a lot. But then you also have like Harry Potter where it does kind of seem to like, you know, it's almost the tone, right? Where, you know, the child like wish fulfillment. I mean, not that Harry's life doesn't suck. Like his life is really difficult, but at the same time, there's a lot of wonder and glory and amazing things that happen to him because he's literally the chosen one. So
Yeah.
it varies, I think.
Yeah, and I think this, yeah, exactly. So it is very hard to read those books like without sort of cheering them on and wishing yourself in their place, so to speak, like as a person reading like the wish fulfillment aspects of it. But here I think the focus on the lack of control they have on the situation
Right.
and the
That's
external
exactly.
manipulation. I think that's what's making it super clear that this is not something you want to be.
Great
I
point.
feel it
Now,
also feels different reading about, chosen one trope as you're a teenager or a child compared to an adult. When you're a child, you're like, yeah, I want to be the special one. When
Yeah.
you're an adult, you're more thinking like, kind of leave me alone. I want to stay in the background, do my own thing.
Yeah, let me
At
just
least
hide
that's
in this
for me.
corner.
I just want to do my own. I don't need to be important. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
right.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go hide
Alright.
under the desk when they come to choose.
Yeah, I just want to live my own life. I have.
Yeah. Yeah. God's chose you. You have to defeat the Dark Lord. Literally turn around and run in the opposite direction. Actually, I want to live on my farm. Excuse you.
It does
No,
feel very different.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there, Varsha, where it really, Erikson with his chosen ones here really hammers home how much it takes away your agency and how, because you're focused on by so many outside forces, and in fantasy, it's literalized oftentimes, right? Like with Sari, when she's literally possessed. But when you have these outside forces that define you, it's like you don't really have as much room to make choices, You are forced into situations, and his chosen ones literally like I wouldn't say they're like passive characters, but they're not the characters who are like really like leading, forces or making decisions that are fundamentally changing events. They're sort of just caught up in the tide,
Yeah.
and they just happen to be at the center of the tide.
Yeah, exactly. And that is what happens in Chosen One stories, except it's glorified and painted completely differently.
Right.
Right? They do have things happen to them, or at least a certain
Yeah.
there is a what is the word I'm looking for? There is a certain lack of control in what happens to you, which is sort of shoved under the carpet, I guess, a little bit.
But in chosen one stories, you are destined to be the chosen one, as in, there's some sort of expectation and some sort of prophecy fulfillment, or, something that like, oh, if I behave the correct way, I'm going to fill in this role that I'm destined for. While here, it's a lot more like, you randomly get caught as a pawn. Like it's not predestination that you're supposed to be the chosen one. So even if you behave correctly, there's no expectation that it's going to end up correctly for you.
That's a great point, Dan. That's the real subversive element to these chosen ones. More than even that, like their lives are tragic. It's how random they are, right? That they're not predetermined, or we're not given any reason to believe that they're predetermined chosen ones, as is usually the case with, any number of stories. It is just chance.
Yeah.
Literally chance. In this case, and that's how it is.
Yep. I feel like we covered quite a bit. Was there anything we missed? We talked briefly about the exchange between Whiskey Jack and Tujik One Arm.
Do you think Chalice actually sold Crocus out?
I never think.
That's my line, Dan.
No, I don't think she sold him out, but who knows?
I
But
think she did.
Oh,
Crocus didn't kill the guard, right?
Slard.
Sorry, did.
Yeah.
Gotta
he's
give
getting the
credit
blame.
where credit is due.
But he doesn't want her to know that she did that since she doesn't remember.
Yeah. Yeah, she does. Yeah, I love that. I love that he's not telling her, hey, you know what? That murder you did. Like, he's hiding this from her, like, just instinctively. So, yeah, that's beautiful. I love their entire exchange, Crocus and Upsalar.
I also love, again, that the name she picks is one that has so much meaning,
Mm.
you know? The power of names, one of my favorite little tropes in fantasy, that she, there's so many reasons that literally the world, what am I trying to say? She could have picked any name,
Mm.
and she picked that one name, which is so meaningful, literally the name of a goddess. And Crocus is, patron goddess, which is why she chose it, right? Because he was like, that was the name he could think of in the moment. But it certainly invites a lot of, oh my God, there I am using invites again. Anyway, he
Getting porridges.
it encourages,
Nice.
you to draw conclusions about how that will shape who she becomes.
Really makes you think.
It really makes you think.
What do you,
Except for you, Dan.
except for Dan? So what we've come to learn is Carl likes to set fires, and Dan doesn't think. And
Never.
Never.
See, and then you guys will forget about this, and then when I repeat it, I will sound like I'm being really mean. um, what was I going to say? What do you think the fact that she's the goddess of thievery, is it, means to Upsala? Is it that she didn't play an active role in getting her life back? So I went in the direction of she's stealing back her life for herself, but she didn't do anything actively. Cotillion just left because Rake made him. But what do you think the significance of that is?
In some way, I feel like, yeah, it's she had her life stolen from her, right? It also directly connects her to Crocus. So I
Yeah.
do think it's a multifaceted thing, and one that, you can interpret in a lot of different ways. And obviously, we haven't seen the end of her story yet, so there's more to come. But certainly, the whole notion of theft is one that is really, I think, crucial to who she is and her experiences up to this point, if not in the most material way, then in a more metaphysical, spiritual, what have you, psychological way. And that's something, and again, it ties her to Crocus, which I think is meaningful as well.
Something that I just thought is there in any like real life religion, like a god or goddess patron of thieves? And I'm trying to think, because it seems like now that I think of it, it seems like a weird thing to have a goddess that's a patron. Because what sort of
Hermes.
virtues are they?
Hermes is the god of thieves. I just said a quick
Is he?
Google search.
Okay.
According to the Google AI, yeah, no, I'm seeing other. Rochester Institute of Technology says Hermes is the god of merchants, thieves, and
Merchant thieves.
travelers.
I see what they're saying there.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I'm wondering, like, what sort of virtues is it embodying? You know what I mean? Because it
No,
seems
luck
such a
not to get
negative
caught.
thing in general.
Quick fingers.
gods are not inherently gods of virtue, though.
Yeah.
I think that's a very Abrahamic view of divinity. Older pantheons were just representations of
Yes.
concepts, and so you think of thieves exist, so thieves need someone to pray to. So one of the gods is going to be a god of thieves.
I guess so. I just sort of don't imagine the thieves as identifying themselves as thieves. They're sort of like, oh, I am a thief because I have to. It's not like my identity. I have to because my situation, not because I want to do it. You know what I mean? And in my mind, like these gods that inhabit negative traits are all more sort of like elemental things, like the god of death, like the god of, I don't know, thunder or bad thing, like in the sense that it's not things that humans want to be. You know what I mean?
I think people would, criminals absolutely lionize crime. Some of them don't, but they're absolutely like, if you're caught up in a life of whatever, like it's part of your identity, then I think you would feel some level of. I mean, humans do. Like, you think of, like, we have noble thieves, right? Like Robin Hood. It's the first one that comes to mind. So I think they're absolutely, like, who are they stealing from? What are they stealing?
Yeah, but is it Robin Hood? Is he really stealing? It's more put like,
Absolutely.
but the nobles are the ones really stealing from the poor people. That's the idea behind, in my mind. It's not Robin Hood is not a thief as in glorifying thievery. He's a thief as in rebalancing the status, like the economic status quo of society.
I
You know
feel
what I
like
mean?
you're creating an immediate moral judgment of theft, where it may not necessarily have to be immediately morally coded.
I see.
You know,
Well, that's how.
it has to be
Sorry
negative.
about my, but
But
yeah, I
and
see
to be
what you're
fair,
saying.
Yeah, I also see what you're saying, because I do think in our society we are rightly taught that theft is bad because, it's an antisocial behavior. But the question, then becomes like, well, why? What's motivating it? And again, like, who and what is being stolen and stolen from?
Yeah.
But even then, even if it is just like a flat negative, people like, there are gods of murder, like, gods of warfare,
True. I
gods
mean,
of
warfare you can justify.
death,
It's like you're defending or you're, it can be sort of just, but yeah,
gods of
fair.
conquest. I mean, people love conquest. People still love conquest. I'm not going to go
True.
there. I was about to. Never mind. Or there are a lot of things that I think we would consider, or many of us would consider, negative things that there are absolutely people in the world view in a positive light. I for sure have had friends who were proud of their teenage shoplifting days.
Mm,
And I've always thought
fair
that's
enough.
weird. But, like, there are people who are like, yeah, fuck them. I stole stuff from CVS. Sorry, that's. Dan, do you know what CVS is?
Yeah, I know what CBS is.
Okay.
Yeah, but I assume these people are not. Yeah, they're not same people. They're not saying, "Oh, I'm proud of stealing money from the beggar outside the superstore or something." You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like if you're stealing from someone more powerful, it's a bit different than if you're stealing from just a poor person or whatever. You
For
know what I
sure.
mean?
No, absolutely.
And in one sense, one is seen as it's like a fight against technically an economic oppressor, and the other one is more like the stealing that I was thinking about. But I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
Like Aladdin. Aladdin would absolutely, if he was worshiping a pantheon of gods, pray to a god of thieves. You know what I mean?
True. I see.
Alibaba.
Exactly.
So I want to bring up this quote because I think it's relevant to our discussion, and maybe we can continue a little bit more in this vein. But page 349 in the trade paperback, Paran thinks to himself about morality, his musings on morality. Some philosophers in Anta proclaimed morality as an imperative of all life, a natural law that was neither the brutal acts of peace nor the lofty ambitions of humanity, but something other, something unassailable. So, yeah, I wanted to bring this up for discussion with the group. Like, what do you think of this idea of absolute morality? I think we have established kind of right now that things like thieving, for instance, are very much relative, and different people may assign different moral judgments right now. Like that seems to be the consensus of this group. But do you think there are aspects of morality that are absolute and not relative between, like based on who's making the judgment?
If you believe in a religion, then yeah, morality is absolute. But I think the only real fancy book we've read, which it really is the
Baker.
Baker,
Baker,
that it is
yeah.
in the intrinsic part of a world, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is immutable. We think here, I would say it's relative. We haven't seen anything that casts really any implicit moral judgment on things, apart from people themselves judging other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even the gods don't. I'm trying to remember. Do they? because everyone can follow their own god, it seems. So it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense for one god to give judgment over what other people do, right? Because they're followers of other gods, right?
Yeah. And even the gods that we've met, like we just talked about the god of thievery. There's also the patron of assassins, who's supposedly a god who encourages the killing of people and even protects them while they're at it. So based on
Yeah. So how can you say, like, how can a god say, oh, killing is wrong? Well, there's another god that says killing it is right, I guess. Right? I assume.
yeah.
I mean, do the gods decide morality, or is it? Because I mean, the philosophical idea there, right, is that it is just like fundamental to the universe. It's not even like a god or gods that defines it, but it is something other and unchangeable. Like you mentioned, Dan, with Baker, where it is like a fundamental metaphysical truth. At the same time, Baker encourages you to ask the question, does that make it right? Should we be like, just because something is moral within the metaphysics of the universe, does that make it okay? Just because something is natural, does that mean it's good? And then obviously here in this, right after that quote you read, Varsha, at least from the perspective of Perrin, right, that he kind of derides that view of the universe as just another hunt for certainty. And I do think that there is a danger in extreme certainty. At the same time, I think we do all have to draw our lines in the sand about where we think, you're crossing a moral boundary.
Yeah. And what was I going to say? Oh God, I forgot.
It's an interesting philosophical question, though, and it is one that, like, how do you define morality, right? Because these concepts, even if they're nebulous, they still have meaning to our lives. Again, like justice, and whatever, like humans exist, like we exist. And so some of these things are like, there is material value to them, but also just because something's material, does that mean it is, more meaningful or more worthwhile, more good than something that is more nebulous?
I think when you're trying to define these things, you need to first define what are you trying to get out of it? You know what I mean? Like, is your objective, is morality something that you use to minimize suffering? Is something that you use to judge where you go when you die, right? As in a lot of religions. Well, if it is where you go when you die, then it's probably defined by whatever Hood says is the moral thing, because he probably decides where you go, right? I guess. Because that's
Or
where
maybe
everyone
once
needs to go.
or maybe he just handles you once you get there, and somebody else has control between here and there, like Opon did.
Maybe, but is that how you define morality in that world? I guess, I don't know. Like, what's your
So
objective?
I mean, I guess, like, in our
Good point.
discussion so far, we've sort of centered it around what a god thinks, but can we take the gods out of the equation and come up with, like, do we need gods and their judgment for morality? Or do you
No.
think the judgment of humans is sufficient to decide what's moral and what's not?
It depends what your first assumption is. If your first assumption is, where do I go when I die? Then probably, you need the gods. Right.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
makes
also
sense.
think that the one of the assumptions you're making too is morality something that is constant, or concrete, something that is objective, like the Untans are philosophizing, right? Is it something that is other and unassailable? And if that's the case, then that doesn't mean you need a god to define it, but it does mean that it is something that exists on a fundamental, cellular level. And I certainly don't think you need a divinity to do. Like, that's one of the easiest falsehoods you hear as as someone who identifies as an atheist, like it's one of the low hanging fruit, by a more like religious person to be like, oh, why, how can you not stop yourself from doing terrible things if you're not, you don't have a God telling you what to do? And it's like, that's not how morality works. As Dan mentioned, there's a lot more context to it than that. It is about, where do you think you're going after death? It's also about what do you think is right in the moment, like in the society you exist in the context you exist in, even in individual moments. And, the question of, are you trying to limit suffering? Is suffering even a bad thing, right? There are many belief systems where, suffering is itself, there's nobility to it.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a fundamental, relativity. At the same time, we have to draw a line in the sand.
I think there's a relativity to where your starting point is, as if, when you're doing math, you need to have assumptions to base your math system on. After you make those assumptions, everything else is logical, right? But you have to make arbitrary assumptions at some point. And I think in morality, we're saying you have to make an arbitrary assumption at some point, and then you can derive your logical, belief and morality system, right? But at some point, you need to say this thing is right because it's right. And then,
given
that,
to bring us back, how the hell does Anamander Rake justify using Dragnapur?
you probably need to know more history about the sword, I feel.
And him, right? I mean, it's like, what is his code where he feels that is acceptable? Or is that just a paradox of him, that he does something which to me does seem so unimaginably and indefensibly cruel?
Yeah.
And he himself is driven by a code of honor and ethics and morality, that seems to be about protecting people who can't protect themselves and giving meaning to the meaning, people who have lost meaning. And
it's just, you don't have to kill them with the sword, right? You can just kill them normally.
Yeah, he knows magic. He knows magic, so he could just like blast them,
Yeah.
But he makes the intentional choice to use the sword.
He could just leave the sword at home.
Condition to the sword him having the sword. I don't know. Shannon, go ahead.
I would say he doesn't even have to. I mean, he could just leave the sword at home. He doesn't have to take it out and kill anybody with it. He chooses to do that.
We're not given any reason to believe that he is like physically stuck with the sword, that like he cannot not wield it.
Maybe he needs to feed it every once in a while or something. Maybe the carriage is carrying something, and if he doesn't feed it all the time with souls to drag it, then something bad is going to happen. I don't know. Maybe there is some sort of thing that moves it, which is why I'm wondering, like, I don't know the history. It would be cool to know it, so then maybe will explain. I guess you guys know, but...
Right.
Yeah, I wonder if we know enough about him to say that maybe he thinks he's serving a higher purpose than, like, whatever bad he is doing with chaining these people for eternity, no less, is offset by whatever he is accomplishing by doing the said chaining. But I don't know if we know enough about that, because it seems unlikely that he's just wielding it
for fun?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because based on his conversation with Baruch, he seems like a very decent guy,
Right.
Is the sword described at any point?
I don't think so. I think it's just very broad, strapped to him, really long. And
I'm imagining it like the Berserk sword,
Yeah.
Maybe because I have to imagine there's a chariot inside. There's a carriage inside, so I'm like, it has to be a big sword.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if it's actually described at some point how big it is.
The carriage has to physically fit inside the sword.
Yeah, but it is a broadsword. Okay, it's not like a rapier. It's not. It's described as a large. Okay,
It is a large sword. Yes.
Okay,
And
fair
I
enough.
think both swords, the Berserk one and
Two-handed sword.
Mm,
Mm.
I see.
the Berserk one and this one were inspired by the Moorcock sword. I think.
Was it Berserk one inspired by Warcock?
I think
I
so.
didn't know
Yeah.
that. Okay.
Was it you or was it Joe who mentioned, or maybe I googled it. I don't remember. But he was inspired by the Eldritch sword.
I've never read that lyric. Maybe I should.
Kintaro Miura, I think, is
Yeah.
the mangaka's name, has talked about Michael Moorcock being an influence on him.
Yeah. The description I'm looking at here, it says it is a long, two-handed sword with a silver dragon skull pommel and an archaic cross hilt. Baruch estimated the wooden scabbard to be a full 6.5 feet long.
Okay. So it is.
Wow,
It is
So it's
big.
long.
It is big.
that is
Okay.
a long
Yeah.
sword.
It's Final Fantasy VII long.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
I don't recall in later books the level of description we get here for the impact that Dragnipur creates when it is wielded. Like
Mm,
people several streets away can, or maybe Baruch can feel it or sense it because of his magical abilities, but they can hear the wagon for that brief instant when it is being
Yeah.
wielded and people are sucked into that warren inside the sword. That's brilliant, and I don't recall it from any later books, but again, I think while I didn't remember the description in and of itself, the impression I took of it for just how terrible that sword is stayed with me through the rest of the series.
Absolutely.
Was there anything else that happens in these books? I feel like we covered quite a bit. Should we move on to quotes?
The last thing is
Mhm.
that we haven't mentioned. Maybe we briefly touched on it. Was that Lorne and Toole end up at the barrow,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
and they find a finist, finesse, however it's
Mm.
pronounced, the little acorn,
Yeah.
the weird colored acorn.
The thing you associate with squid is.
Tell me that scene wasn't straight out of Indiana Jones, by the way. Like, she's looking for the finest. Oh, there's the thing. No, we're going to reach behind it, and there's a little acorn.
Right. It's the thing that, it's not the obvious looking magical treasure. It's the humble little natural acorn.
Yeah. Makes you think the tyrant maybe is not actually a bad person. Yeah.
Maybe he's not a bad guy.
Maybe.
Maybe
Maybe
he's got
not.
a lot of bad PR.
Yeah.
He needed a better.
Just needs a hug.
Yeah.
There was a particularly terrifying moment, given everything that we've learned about the tyrant so far. The fact that Mammoth, in response to Baruch's question about what the tyrant might be up to, like where they are with respect to the tyrant, and he's like, "Yeah, give me a moment," and then goes to sleep and doesn't wake up yet. And what he's doing is earth magic. That scene was legit terrifying because what if he comes in contact with the tyrant?
Maybe it's fine.
Maybe it's fine.
I mean, I guess do we know exactly what they do? I guess they enslave people, and then what do they make them do? I don't know. Have we been told what they actually do, these tyrants?
I don't think so. And
The Jaga tyrants, they just enslave people. Their personality overwhelms them, I guess, and
Yeah.
makes them slaves,
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, but I don't think it gets into specifics.
Okay. I am curious because I'm like, there's so much not said about who they actually are and how they do what they do. I don't know. How do they enslave people? Is it magic? Is it? I don't know.
yeah, and we've been told several times already that the Jagut were peaceful people. So you have to
Yeah.
wonder if the fact that he's a tyrant is a sort of relative notion of, compared to how peaceful the rest of them were. Maybe he's a tyrant in that respect. But there was one piece of information we got about the Jagut, which I can't now find, but it was something to the effect that when they became violent, they went berserk and wouldn't listen to any reason. So maybe that's what they did. That they have very high destructive power when they go into tyrant mode.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah. That was also interesting because of another character that we'll meet later, but we'll talk about it when we get to it. So I think we're ready to do quotes. We've lost Carl, but
Yeah, let's hope
hopefully he'll
the
come back.
fire didn't reach his house.
Yeah. Hopefully he'll
Oh
get back.
no. Yeah. Okay. Do you guys have any quotes?
I'm not a quote guy.
Well, I got a stupid one because it was right at the very end of the last chapter we were reading. I read it today and it made me bust out laughing.
Yes, gimme.
But it was it's when Apsalar and Crocus are getting to the top of the belfry, and they come out, and Apsalar stiffened in a gasp. "That's a dead man." "What?" Crocus hissed. "Not another one." And he rushed to the huddled figure and crouched beside it. "Blessed Bowery, somebody stabbed him in the head."
Yeah.
It's just the nodded. It's like, he kept telling Apsalar, "I'm going to take us somewhere safe, somewhere nobody will look." And it's like, and then I think he'd said on the way up, he's like, "Oh yeah, assassin got killed up here, like a week ago." Not another one.
There's another one. And yay, Carl's back.
Hey, there's Carl.
Oh, I really like the one towards the very end with Apsalar talking about the other moon, not Moonspawn, about how it has oceans. The big one, the Greyland Sea, the lord of the deep waters living there is named Greyland. He tends vast, beautiful underwater gardens. I love that. I love that whole description. And also, a question for the group that I'm stealing from a friend on the forum is, do you think that there are actual seas on the moon in this world? Or do you think it's kind of like the way we think about the seas on the moon, with the craters and such?
Yeah, but came a bit from nothing. Like, where did that information come from?
I mean, it felt like just some myth that she might have grown up with because she's a fisher girl and there are seas even on the moon.
I think
that makes sense.
I think their moon's probably like our moon. It's a dead rock, but just like, my mom told me that the moon was made out of cheese when I was a kid. Her dad's telling her about oceans on it.
I thought it was some sort of secret knowledge that the god knew, and then now she knows or something. Yeah, it's okay. Interesting, but...
Oh, yeah.
But what you said makes a lot more sense. How I think about it.
Yeah. And yeah, that description was very, very beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was too. We're on quotes, Carl, if you couldn't tell.
Yes, I'm looking up, trying to find my favorite quote. Sorry, I had a power surge. Glad to be back. And also, for any listener curious, Steve had to go earlier, so that is why no one has heard from him.
I saw in the chat. He did need somebody to let him know when our final discussion is. I'm assuming it'll be next Tuesday.
Yeah. Next Tuesday. Yeah, I think we'll just do that.
One quote I liked back from chapter 15 was when Tool was talking about, it says here, the Telanomass worked in the span of millennia, their purpose their own, yet their endless war had become her endless war. The Scene's empire was a shadow of the first empire. The difference lay in the IMAS conducted genocide against another species. Malaz killed its own. Humanity had not climbed out of the dark age of the IMAS. It had spiraled down. I like that one, that last bit there. Like, because especially as we move more into the series and we learn more about the IMAS and their whole war with the Jaguts, it's just to think, like, we're worse than them. That's pretty bad.
I like the epigraph at the beginning of chapter 14. I saw them on the shores, the deepening pits of their gaze, vowed immortal war against the sighing calm of Jagut seas, which, again, is such a great way of reiterating the fact that the Jagut have been, as far as we know, like from what we've been told so far, a very peaceful people that the Imas have sworn war against. the sighing calm of Jagut seas. I like that.
Well, I guess the idea is, the Jagat were peaceful except for those ones that weren't,
Yeah.
and they had the power to enslave all these people and stuff. So the IMAS's reaction to that was genocide.
Yeah.
Which is
nice, right?
Well, I mean,
That's
it
of
is.
course. Of course, why
Kill them
wouldn't you
all.
kill everybody who looks like the person you hate? I also like the epigraph beginning chapter 16 about December knowing the sorrows in our souls. He walks at the side of each mortal, a vessel of regret on the fires of vengeance. December knows the sorrows and would now share them with us all. Oh, this is interesting. A vessel of regret on the fires of vengeance. That feels a bit like Paran going for vengeance, but like he was thwarted at various points trying to seek vengeance, and now he just kind of has to live with whatever he can get. He desperately wanted to kill Lon, and Whiskey Jack's like, no, you can't do that. We need her for other reasons. But first he starts out with wanting vengeance against Hairlock. He doesn't get that. So his repeated thwarting of vengeance, like that's not the regret that he gets out of it. But if he had access to that, do you think all he would be left with is regret? Or at least I get the sense that that's what it would be. So I really like this poem. Carl, did you find yours?
Honestly, a lot of the epigraphs, I mean, the one you mentioned was one that stood out to me as well. Another one that I think is maybe a little harder to parse, particularly on a first read, but is meaningful when you dig into it, is the following epigraph in chapter 15. "'Tis bloody stirrups when the jagged ride their souls, a thunderous charge without surcease. The hard knots within thud, drumming fierce the flow of ice, a certain promise. 'Tis the jagged warring the dusk on a field of broken stones." Which, beyond being a lot of beautiful language, does touch upon that other side to the jagged, I think, which is once they get started, once they're made to be violent, it's hard to stop them. They are literally like a force of nature.
Yeah.
And that is definitely something to keep in mind.
I like that. And I was wondering about what the warring the dusk part of that poem meant. Like, it made me think of the Distandi because of like the darkness association, but I don't think that's what this is about. But I like what you said about maybe force of nature. Maybe that's all that is.
I mean, it might be too like them warring against their own demise. You know, the dusk of their species.
That's nice. Yes. Oh, I like that. Because do we know whether there are any Jagut left at this point, or have the Tilanimas rooted them all out? Because it has to be at some point that most of them are dead. Okay, I like that. I like that.
Certainly, if any exist, there are not that many of them.
Yeah. A few and far between.
They're hidden away.
Yeah, such that when they, the Talani mass discovered that some were alive, they went out of their way, literally dropped everything to go and kill them.
Yeah.
Finish the job.
We didn't talk about like that brief intervention with Paran running into the girl who used to be Tatasale, but I guess not much there besides just that. And there's also
you're right. Yeah.
an epigraph poem which I think is Tatasale or like Tatasale Reborn, for the beginning of the 5th section, where a girl is apparently reading the deck of dragons and is seeing that Jagut tyrant is going to be awakened, and child's eyes are wide with fear. With terror, sorry.
Absolutely. Now, Silver Fox, another character to take note of.
Yes.
Tattersale Reborn. That whole bit, I struggle with Perrin and Tattersale's relationship. Like, it just didn't feel like the meaning was earned.
I
in the
mean,
book, and so I don't know.
I do wonder if that, I mean, if it was intended as a proper relationship, I agree with you, but I think Paran was very much under the influence of Upon at the time, and like random things happened. So I wonder if some of the intensity came from being manipulated by a god.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. Power draws power, right? And in the same way that may make powerful people, important people, literally attracted to one another.
Yeah. And also, some of it was behind the scenes, right? We weren't privy to the time they spent together. They were literally locked together in a room. But I think the way it was written was, as soon as like one of them came back to consciousness, they immediately became attracted to each other. That the whole thing had a very unnatural feel to it, which I think is the point. Like it's not unnatural because it's written badly or it's like unearned. I think it's unnatural because it's meant to be because of the god's interference, probably. That's my read of that situation anyway.
Maybe. I think this is one of those that Erikson just whiffed on.
Mm.
But maybe it is meant to feel artificial. I get the sense that it's more like two people seeking comfort with each other, and it just happened to become really meaningful to Perrin because of how raw he was emotionally at the time, and he's getting this survivor complex, and all of that made it more impactful. But I just struggle. It doesn't read as believable to me. And if it is meant to be read as like a sort of like forced together by fate thing, I don't know. It just didn't work for me. I just didn't find, like, I feel like meeting Silver Fox, while a cool scene, wasn't as emotionally impactful as it could have been if I felt like their relationship was moving to me, and I
Yeah.
just was not moved by it.
Yeah, we probably needed a bit more of it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think a bit
But
more
one
time
thing
with
though,
them
real
together.
quick,
Go ahead.
just looking at, because I have a highlight here that where Perrin meets Silver Fox, and he, in his thoughts here, there's a mention of reborn already a child of 5, maybe 6. Are you even mortal anymore, woman? Have you ascended? You found yourself a people, a stranger, but like, is this our first mention of like somebody ascending? Like that's a thing?
It's been mentioned before in passing. I mean, it's never been like defined. But the
Okay.
ascended have been mentioned. I think Rake, someone questioned if Rake was ascended.
Okay. But that's something to note, is that that's a thing people can do, is ascend.
Yes, that is definitely significant. Good thing to note. Yeah.
Just put in your back pocket for future books.
Yep. Back pocket this. Anything else before we wrap up for the evening? All right, then thank you so much for listening, and we will see everybody next week with the rest of the book. Yeah, once again, check out the Pagechewing forum if you're interested in talking to us about these books or anything else. Good night.